So we would like to know what is your present position at PA and why did you change your position after being for many years the International Students Coordinator?
Sure. My name is Aya Murata, and I am currently one of the Associate Directors of College Counseling here at PA. I'm also this year in charge of the new ninth grade pilot program for our health and wellness curriculum called the Foundations class. And then I also am a complement in Clement House, and I help out with timing and measuring events at track meets. And I'm also now currently a mother of a 10th grade child here at PA as well. And so over the time that I've worked at Phillips Academy, which is my 25th year working at the Academy, I have done a number of different things. And so I started out actually in admissions here at Andover, and during that time I had been responsible for the international applications as part of some of my responsibilities. And so that sort of was a nice transition to then actually going part-time and working and going to graduate school. And then when the time came to think about what I wanted to maybe do next here at PA, because I definitely wanted to say this is a very special community, I thought, well, gosh, I love international students, and I had this experience thinking about bringing international students to PA through my work in admissions. And at that time, my colleague, Hal McCann, who had been the International Student Coordinator for many years, was retiring. So I thought, oh, well, this might be a really interesting opportunity for me to jump into. So so there I was, landed in the CAMD office in 2000, and assumed that role for 5 years. And at that point, there was an opportunity to apply for one of the cluster dean positions. And so since I had a nice 5-year run of International Student Coordinator, I thought I would shift and change and give myself a different kind of challenge, and so applied for a cluster dean, and so then I did that for 8 years.
Wow, that's an impressive career at PA.
Yeah. So now, could you tell us a little bit about how was the community, Andover community, when you were the international coordinator? Did it change?
Well, gosh, it seems like so long ago. In those 5 years, I think we were actually we were in a very nice position and having a pretty steady influx of international applications, and so a nice opportunity to select students who we felt would be a good fit for Phillips Academy. Certainly the Kemper program is so well established even at that point that, and we have such, and still do have such great contacts in those countries who are already screening and getting excited another group of students every year. And so, in that 5-year time, I would say we continue to see an increase in the numbers of students internationally who are interested in Phillips Academy, so that was always great to see. And those numbers certainly have grown even more exponentially since that time. And thinking about the numbers of kids that we've seen now who attend the new International Student Orientation, and certainly are coming from a broader range of countries as well. We still probably have certain countries that are sending us students year after year after year, but I think the world has gotten a little smaller, so the access is certainly, this was sort of pre-internet, just sort of getting going. So I think certainly with the explosion of the internet and access, so many more students can hear and learn about Phillips Academy without ever having to actually come to our campus. Just after the time that I was the International Student Coordinator, I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, but it was very rare that we'd actually have students from mainland China, so I would say that's probably one of the bigger differences. We had very few students from mainland China. We had an established program with the Harbin Institute, and so that was always nice to be able to bring 1 or 2 students, and at that time, then just I think after or at about that time, that relationship ended, and so certainly as different visa policies have changed, and students now from mainland China are more able to get visas those numbers have increased, but it was so very difficult for students to be guaranteed visas more than just a year that we found it very risky, at least back then, to admit a student as a 9th or 10th grader, because we weren't guaranteed to know that that student would be able to renew their visa year after year after year. But obviously that's clearly changed. As well, I would say the numbers of students who are coming from South Korean local schools has increased. I mean, normally the students that we would see coming from South Korea were coming from the international schools, Seoul Florence or Seoul International School, and that has certainly really increased and changed that demographic over the years. And then I would say we used to see many more students coming from Hong Kong and not as many. I think Latin America is still an area of the world, and obviously the continent of Africa, that we don't see as many applications for students. But certainly the Kemper Scholars was an incredible opportunity for us to also bring students from Europe to our communities, when again the school systems there are also very, very good, and so coming to the States is very expensive. So this for us was and it's just a wonderful, I think, relationship in sort of that feedback loop, and having students come who often didn't have any opportunity to come to the U.S. before landing here in late August, early September.
And how has the camper community changed over time, like during the years?
Gosh, to me it's actually, I was very involved with the Kemper community for many years, obviously as the coordinator, and less so as I've moved sort of away. I always tried to get some Kempers in Pine Knoll Cluster, where I was a cluster dean, sort of selfishly to sort of stay in touch, but I couldn't always make that work. But for me, I think it's nice to see that the relationship and the kinds of students are still very much the same. Students who are so excited and interested in coming and having this experience and being able to take what you've learned and bring it back to your home countries, and then eventually, like the young woman Ava, who's now come back for graduate school, and other students who have sometimes had the opportunity to come back, I think is really exciting. And from the students who I still stay in touch with, this period of time was just very instrumental in sort of helping them think about things differently, or just as always will sort of keep a very special place in their heart. But I don't think actually necessarily the Kemper Scholars themselves have really changed. I think you very much come bright-eyed and excited to take in this experience and to get involved in the community here, even though it's such a short, like 9 months. Feels very quick, but that it can have a long-lasting impact on your lives.
And do you think that the Kemper Scholars make a difference in the Andover community?
Oh, absolutely. Because again, we don't necessarily see students from Spain, France, Germany, Italy applying on their own to come here. So it's a real opportunity. And of course, it was born a little bit out of like what were the countries of the languages that we were teaching here, and a little bit of like, oh, we could have real native speakers like come and help our domestic students really understand the language and the culture and the country better. And so that aspect still remains the same. But absolutely, I feel like it's such an important part of Phillips Academy's mission of Youth from Every Quarter, and being able to have you be part of the community, both in a formal sense of like in what you bring to the classroom in terms of your interests and talents, but also that perspective of a different lens and seeing, whether it's an issue in U.S. history or, some way of thinking about a math problem, to, of course, then the very social, opportunities that you get to have in the dormitories, and, having other students get to know you and you get to know other students in ways that I think that's the sort of parallel and second type of education that students get at Andover.
What's the biggest challenge that usually Kemper students face once they come?
Oh gosh, well, whether it's Kemper specifically or sometimes international students broadly, I guess there are two that jump to mind. Well, first, for Kempers or for any international student who hasn't ever been to the United States before. I mean, I think that's one huge giant challenge, is trying to adjust. And I don't know if Ms. Tarabi still uses this metaphor, but it was a metaphor that Mr. McCann had taught me that I thought was really a helpful way of thinking about transition and culture shock. And it was about your cultural crutches, and that, we come, when you're so familiar with a country and culture, you don't even think about a lot of things. You don't think about, how close do I stand next to somebody, or what's the proper way to greet someone, or how do I acknowledge that I'm really engaged in this conversation, or all, again, the very sometimes very subtle aspects of our culture that we don't really think about. Dining, for example, too, is another one. Like, if I'm at my host family's house and I'm really full, do I leave a little bit of food on my plate? Do I have to make sure there's no food on my plate, or are they gonna keep eating, feeding me, and I'm gonna keep eating, and then, what's the proper way in this culture to express my gratitude, or what have you. So we don't need, we don't have those same questions. And so then all of a sudden you land in a new environment and you don't have those cultural crutches. So, that makes you feel, it's always like, you feel uncomfortable and you feel uncertain. And so then that can often sometimes then manifest itself in, whether it's sadness or anger or like frustration or like, my country is better than this country. Like, what am I doing here? So lots of different things. I mean, again, that's sort of more broad to anybody who comes to the U.S. to study, I think, for the first time, or to go to any country for the first time, and feeling, you lack the confidence that you used to have in another country. Or certainly, I think, for the Kempers, for the first time, often using English all day long. And so the sort of exhaustion level of having to really focus in on every conversation in the classroom, just casually in the dorm common room. And that, I think, we take for granted that in our native tongue, you can be just walking down the hall, and if someone's talking, you whether you're paying attention or not, you know what they're talking about. Whereas in a second language, you have to think and concentrate really hard, and that's exhausting. And so we talk about that being those mental push-ups. And so, that then the sort of exhaustion and accumulation of that, I think, is really hard in the beginning, as Kempers will come and have to engage in their classes in a ways also that they might not have had to do in their home communities, where maybe their classes were quite large, and so class participation was not necessarily expected. And so, you come to PA, and all of a sudden, every conversation you have in English class and history class and, even your sciences, there's this expectation that you're going to be part of that conversation. And so if you are working so hard in this other language that you're not used to operating in all day long, and you're trying to keep up with the conversation, and you're just trying to understand what just happened, and then you've already moved on to another topic. I think it's really just hard. So those, I would say, again, universally, but certainly applied to the Kempers too. And then I think just other, there's a lot, but maybe I'll just leave it at that. I think the language piece and being new to the United States, and understanding what is U.S. culture and American culture, and then also what's PA culture. And sometimes there's the overlap, but sometimes it's also very different too. And I think it's a lot all at once to also be, trying to make friends and trying to get involved in just other aspects of the community, and obviously trying to do well in school, and the layers, are pretty significant. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Is there any anecdote you would like to tell us?
About a specific camper. Campers.
Maybe a year you remember.
Oh gosh, so many. So this is different, for the Kempers now than when the years that I was organizing the Kempers. Was that there used to be, so obviously the Kemper program requires that you stay in the States basically the whole time that you're here, and so that incorporated spring vacation. So spring vacation, and again, this is that now we would never allow our students to do this because there's all kinds of liability and things like that. So I kind of laugh at this now, but and we were always trying to save money too. And so the spring vacation, it was not a requirement of the Kempers, but often all the Kempers would go, and then sometimes like maybe a Thai scholar or maybe someone else who couldn't go home for that break, I would organize a spring vacation trip. And so they would start in Boston, and they would take the Amtrak train all the way down to Florida. And so it was the overnight train, so it was hours and hours and hours, and like this, not like a train like I imagine in Europe, like where there's beds and things. I mean, it's like you're in a seat for a bajillion hours. And so then they would go to a couple of places in Florida. They go to Disney World, and they go to the beach, and then I think eventually and then somewhere there was DC. I can't remember if that was on the way down or the way back. And then eventually we started adding on New York City. But the thought that these kids were just kind of off, and I would say like they would stay at all these youth hostels too. So I would book their stay at the youth hostel, and then we would have to go into Boston and go get their special passes for the train for international students, and it's just all sort of a little bit hysterical. But they always had kind of I think lots of adventures, some of which I heard about, and some I'm sure I probably still will never hear about. But whether it was sunburned on the beaches because they were so excited after a long winter here to just be out in the sunshine, to their escapades in various cities in the U.S. I just always, there's not something specific there, but it was always this big deal, this whole spring vacation trip. And I remember actually, I must have had, it must have been it was my first year because I was pregnant with my first son, so this was in January of 2001. And there was only a certain day that we had organized to go. You had to go in person with your passport to go pick up these train tickets. And it had snowed that morning, but I was like, well, we have to go. And I was like 9 months pregnant. I think I had my older son, Aki, like a week later. No, it was what am I talking about? Like, it was that Sunday morning. Drove in, and Aki was born the next day. So I was like really pregnant. And he was early, so that was like the other thing. I was like, I have too much to do. I've got to get the Kempers their tickets, and we've got like other stuff to do. Because happily, Mr. McCann, who had just retired and was happy to be retired, he actually came back to fulfill my time when I was on maternity leave. So I was like, oh, this is even better. Like, he knows the job better than I know the job because I haven't done the job yet. But I said, gosh, I have to. So I just remember driving one of those rally wagons into Boston with the kids in the car, the Kempers in the car, like hugely pregnant, and like driving in the snow. And then we got there, and then driving back. And I just remember the rally wagon was fishtailing up the ramp of the highway, and thinking like, this is probably not a really like safe thing to be doing, but I had sort of like needed to get it done before the baby came, so got that checked off. You're learning a lot about me today.
Absolutely.
That is awesome.
Yes. Yeah, thank you so much.
Oh, sure. That's it?
Yeah.
Oh.
Is there anything else you want to tell us? Or?
Gosh, I don't know. Just love the Kempers. They're great, and it's I think it's just a very special aspect of our community, and and it's nice to know that some of my different cohorts stay in very close contact with one another, and then the opportunities. Some countries are a little bit better than others than trying to have organized events that bring different various years together, but there is just that strong connection, I think, among the Kemper scholars, country to country, but within all the countries too, to just, that you all have this bond that you share together of this 9-month period of time spent at, ages 18, 19, 20, to spend together. So, we are so, fortunate and feel so blessed to have you spend your time and sacrifice and from, time spent with your family and the challenges that it is to be here. It's not always easy. So, thank you.
Thank you so much.
No, you're welcome.
This was perfect.